This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Hey, this is Brian Peña. I always join the Vito podcast, the best podcast in the United States.
This week's Two Bad Hombres podcast is brought to you by The Athletic. Premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Two Bad Hombres listeners can get 20% off the first year of an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.com/DSP.
I was trying to get it out here. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get it, get fly. I got 6 jobs. I don't get tired.
And we are still not tired on this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. I am your host, Vito Jerome Churko, along to my usual broadcast partner, sidekick, and everything in the doc, John Charles Macaroon. And John, how are you doing?
Vito, welcome to the weekend. Always enjoy our conversations. I love when I get text messages from you earlier in the week, and you tell me, look, we got this guest coming in, and this week I'm very excited for our in-studio guest. Who we got this week, Vito?
We have Earl the Twirl Cureton, former Detroit Mercy men's basketball star, current Detroit Pistons community ambassador, and former longtime NBA big man. Earl, glad to have you on board in studio this week. How are you doing?
Oh, it's my pleasure. Pleasure to be here. I'm doing really good.
Well, great to have you here. Better weather. We're close to spring, so at least the weather's improving too,
Don't curse us now because, March is here, and you know what can happen in March. So I know we got a few good days here. I'm not going to get too excited. I'm just going to enjoy them.
Don't want to jinx anything. You are right. Now, let's start off by touching upon your basketball career and how it actually started. So I know you went to Finney High School, to Robert Morris, and then you finished off your college basketball career at Detroit Mercy, when it was actually the University of Detroit. Now, to start off, going back to high school, and actually before then, how did your career start? So leading up to going to Detroit Finney for high school.
Wow. I grew up on the east side of Detroit. I went to Joy Junior High School. That's where I guess I first started playing basketball, in junior high school at about age 12, 13 years old. That's when I picked up my first ball, and that's when I fell in love with the game. Wasn't very good. When I got started, it took me a while. It was my career kind of just gradually just went in the right direction. One thing about it, and I always tell the kids, but I had a real passionate love for basketball because it takes a lot of hard work, especially when you reach the level that I reached and was able to do that. Each year I got a little bit better. I wasn't always 6'9". That kind of helped, when I kind of grew into my body a little bit. But I had a gradual career, in high school back then, and I went to Finney High School on the east side after leaving Joy Junior High School. I didn't start really blossoming until probably the 11th grade, 12th grade in high school. I was 6'4", when I was in high school. And then when I left, I shot up to 6'9" my first year of college. So I actually was a late bloomer, and I kind of just took it step by step. Had a pretty good high school career my senior year. But at that particular time, the PSL was so talented that it's kind of overshadowed by all of the great players that played. And, just naming some of them were Greg Kelser in my class, and Terry Durod was in that class, and Bruce Flowers and Tom Staten. And I can go on and on with some of the great players that played. Lawrence Knight, that was a first-round pick out of Northeastern High School, was in that class. So it was so many guys. Every school in the PSL at that particular time at least had 2 guys that were going to go to Division I basketball. And a lot of those guys that I just named went on to play in the NBA with Allen Harding over at Northwestern that played for the Lakers. And we know Kelser was the number 4 pick in the draft. But that's the type of competition that I was faced in the PSL in Detroit growing up. And, Detroit's basketball rich at that particular time with players. And that was a trend that started back with George the Iceman Gervin and Reggie Harding. They grew up on that side of town. Bubba Hawkins, and this is before my time, but all these guys grew up right in the neighborhood. Eric Money, Cornell Norman. I can just name so many great guys. And, Cornell Norman, Eric Money went on to play in the NBA. And, of course, Spencer Haywood and, that group. And just that's when, basketball was king in the PSL.
So you were tested every single night in the PSL, no doubt.
There's no question about it. I was tested in my neighborhood as a kid growing up. Playing basketball over there everywhere you went. Some of those names I just threw out there at every playground and every recreation center, you were going to run into one of those guys. And not knowing what they were going to be back then. And George Gervin was probably one of the premier players to come off the east side of Detroit. They had spectacular NBA career. And then, of course, Spencer Haywood was a one and done at the University of Detroit as well. And, that era kind of went through my era of the Kelser and them, and then it led on to having your Derek Colemans and your Chris Webbers and Jalen Roses and all of those guys. So, Detroit's produced a lot of great basketball players.
So from Finney to Robert Morris for the start of your college basketball career, how did that end up happening? You go into Robert Morris.
Well, like I said, I wasn't recruited by a whole lot of top teams coming out. I hadn't completely, I was still growing. I was 17 years old. I came out. I was going to turn 18 that September, and I got an offer to go to Robert Morris College, which was a 4-year business school, but it had a great junior college program. And I was at the Great St. Cecilia where all the players played working out when one of the coaches from Robert Morris was there watching, and it came to me and offered me a chance to go there. And at that particular time, Sam Washington Sr. was living. His son had already committed to go to Robert Morris, and he said it'd be a good idea if, you and Sam would go down to Robert Morris together. You guys could go down there, and it'd give you a chance to hone your skills and get better, and then look at, maybe a big D1 school. At that particular time, the University of Detroit was really booming. That's back when they had Dennis Boyd, and, they had Chester Wilson and, all those guys, and Tyler and Long was just committed to go there, and they had a great team, and I always had my eye on the University of Detroit. But Vitale, he hadn't reached out to me at 6'5".
What was the early scouting report on your game in your early adolescence, heading into college and things like that? How would people describe your game back in the day?
Well, when I was in high school, I shot the basketball well from the outside. I averaged 20 points a game in the PSL. I could really shoot the ball. I could handle the ball. But growing late, I had picked up some skills. I was quick and I was fast. Obviously, things kind of changed as I got taller, because back then they didn't allow big guys to handle until Magic Johnson came along. But I was always in the DNBP, Detroit Neighborhood Basketball Program skills contest all over the city. So I was kind of forming into my game. But the good thing about it, I learned how to have some versatility, by growing late, because I played different positions. So I kind of brought the ball up in high school, and I shot the long-range jumpers, and that turned out to me being an under-the-basket defensive player, once I got into the NBA.
Speaking of shooting the long-range jumper, the big man has evolved over the years big time, right, to where that's the norm now among all these big men. You have to be able to shoot the three ball, even like Blake Griffin with the Pistons, right, who's developed that three-point shot over time. And then you see the prominent guys really that can shoot the three ball so effectively are Kevin Love. Dudes like that have become really sharpshooters from three-point range. But that wasn't truly the case, right, for the big man back in the day, correct? When you were growing up and playing? No,
that was unheard of. You didn't see too many big guys that shot the ball from the perimeter. In fact, even in the NBA, Bill Laimbeer was like a rare commodity of shooting the long ball. He had a huge advantage because all centers would always run straight down to the post, and Laimbeer would stop at the top of the key, and he had that range and was able to knock down a lot of shots from there. But, the game has evolved since that time, and now your 6'10s and 6'11s, and you don't even have back-to-the-basket centers anymore. They all stretch 4s and 5s now that can shoot the ball from the outside. But you didn't have big guys that had that type of versatility. Magic was at a huge advantage because I don't think it was another 6'9" point guard in the NBA at that particular time. You had some guys playing that guard position, but it wasn't another one that was 6'9". I think Robert Reed was probably one of the bigger guards at 6'7" back then. George Gervin obviously could play some 3 and some 2 at that position. But I think Magic Johnson may have been the only in the 80s 6'9" point guard playing, and then along come Penny Hardaway.
So back to your decision to transfer to Detroit Mercy to finish your college basketball career. Why did you make that decision?
Well, what happened with Robert Morris, they were known as a junior college. I had no idea. They kind of hinted to me that they were going to go Division I. I didn't know it was going to be the very next year. So actually, I played a year of junior college ball at Robert Morris, and that school went into NCAA Division I. During that transition period, I grew from 6'5" to 6'9". I started getting recruited by all schools because everybody kind of had an idea, by me being at a junior college, that I probably wouldn't stay at Robert Morris. So I had a lot of offers to go to a lot of different colleges. I was getting recruited like a kid out of high school after my first year at Robert Morris College.
So now I know you never actually played for Dickie V at Detroit Mercy because he went on to become the AD and then the head coach of the Detroit Pistons. But what was it like being recruited by him and Detroit Mercy?
That was real interesting. Dick came after me, and he came after me hard. When he found out, through Smokey Gaines, that was assistant coach and his coaching staff, they got the word of what I was doing down at Robert Morris College. He tried to get me out in time to be on that team, that Sweet 16 that Detroit had. He wanted me to come in that year. I couldn't transfer the first year. I had to stay in. I didn't have enough hours that would get me into, U of D, and he was doing everything he could to try to get me over there so I could have been eligible to play that year. Obviously, I shot up to 6'9", but Vitale was on me, so I had to stay at Robert Morris for a year of Division I basketball, where I ended up averaging 17 points and 11 rebounds. That would probably make you a high draft pick right now.
Not too shabby.
But my conversations with Dick was every day while I was in college. Back then we had no cell phones or anything like that, so at around 4:15, I had a certain time every day. I would go to the payphone at the end of my hall in the dorms, and Vitale would call me, and he would yell at me for about 20 minutes on the phone. And you know how Dick is. I was very, very rarely able to get a word in. And you promised me you're coming to the University of Detroit. You're going to be our next guy. He would give me his wholesale pitch. Don't lie to me, son. You said you come. So every day I would hear from Dick, and he would call, and I would talk to him, and I was like, I'm coming. And he wasn't convinced until school was out, and I ended up signing a letter of intent to go to the University of Detroit. I was recruited really heavily by Indiana State, which was kind of, a different type of thing because, as you know, Indiana State had Larry Bird, and I actually played that year at Robert Morris. We played 18 away games because we didn't have a facility big enough to play home games. So Larry Bird actually had transferred from Indiana to Indiana State. So I played against Larry Bird. That was my first encounter of seeing him in college. I made all tournament, with him on a team down there with Stetson and in fact, Bob Heaton that played on that championship team was in that tournament with Denver, and they went after me and Bob Heaton really hard to transfer into Indiana State. So if I hadn't went to University of Detroit, I might have ended up, playing with Larry Bird down there, which would have been, a big deal too because they ended up playing Magic and those guys in NCAA championship that year.
Larry Legend himself.
Yes, I met him before anybody knew who he was. I played against him, and I think he went for 57 points and 40-something rebounds in 2 games, and that's how I was introduced to Larry Bird.
So could you tell from that he was bound for stardom?
No question about it. I hadn't seen anything like it. The scouting report they gave me, obviously he hadn't played any college games because that year I think he set out at Indiana. He transferred to Indiana State, was his first year playing there. And my scouting report was on Carlton Webster. I remember that was Marvin Webster's cousin. And he was a 7-footer, and they was giving me all this info. And they went over, I think Carl Nix might have been on the end of the bench of that team at that particular time too. And they, and at the end of the scouting report, and they said, oh, by the way, they got this guy named Larry Bird that transferred in this year. So, and the game started, and, Larry Bird pulled up at 6'9", knocked down a 3. Next time he came down, he gave an up fake and went to the basket and dunked on everybody. And next time he threw a no look, and I was like, God, who is this white kid?
You could tell he has game right away. Yeah, he's relevant. He's definitely relevant. A guy that we should pay some attention to.
So, as the tournament went on, I just kept seeing more and more. I still got the clippings of where I made all tournament with him in that tournament. But that was my introduction to Larry Bird.
So back to Detroit Mercy now. And what's your fondest memory of playing at Callahan Hall?
Wow. I mean, people can imagine what Callahan was back then. I mean, Vitale did such a great job of marketing and recruiting inner city talent. Obviously, Derry Durod, John Long, Toronto Anderson was one of the top high school players that he brought in. Dave Niles out of Garden City. Eventually, Joe Kopecki came from Warren Fitzgerald. And we had so many talented guys, and they brought in a guy named Jerry Davis, is one of the top scorers down in Texas. But when I first came, it was just an atmosphere that you couldn't believe. The arena was packed, and everybody remembered the great wins over Marquette and seeing Arizona come in. You couldn't get a seat in Callahan Hall. And Dick was pretty much before his time with Mike Bronker because they had the light shows and they had the screen that you bust through at the beginning and the opening, and we had the jerseys that hung out like Marquette, and and Dick had it rocking. He orchestrated the whole thing. It was a show that you came down there and see, and he orchestrated it. And that was something that if you were a kid coming out in your own hometown, you definitely would want to be a part of it.
He had the flair for the dramatic, Dickie V.
Oh, no question.
And he knew how to entice the fans into Callahan to get the crowd roaring. And the product was great, I know, at Detroit Mercy at that time, too.
Well, he did a good job of, naming his players. I'm Earl the Twirl that's been with me all of my life, and then you had John Long, you had Sweet Dew and Thunder and Lightning. And, he put all these names out here. And every room that he stepped in, every building that he stepped in, he was loud. And he was Dick Vitale. And people knew about the product that he had. He sold the product. We won a lot of basketball games down there. That's what bring people into the building when you're winning games. And then to the point where we started scheduling tough opponents, and we would get wins by the average opponents. And then all of a sudden, we get one of these top teams in the country to come in, a Minnesota or Arizona. And if we got lucky enough to knock one of those teams off, then people went crazy. And that's how he pretty much orchestrated the schedule. And each year, the schedule got a little bit tougher. So, that's how things went for those years that Vitale was there. Unfortunate for me, after the recruiting process of going through everything with Vitale, he got so big that the Detroit Pistons wanted him. At that particular time, if we played a game the same night the Pistons played at Callahan Hall, we drew more fans at Callahan Hall than they would at Cobo Hall for the Detroit Pistons.
When you got the nickname Earl the Twirl, did you embrace it, or was it something else that you maybe wish you would have gotten called?
No, I mean, when he gave it to me, I just kind of accepted what he said. I had moves around. He said, we got to have a name. We got to give you a name. You're going to be Earl the Twirl. That's it. You're Earl the Twirl, So, and it stuck, and it's been with me ever since.
So you went on to play parts of 12 seasons in the NBA, and you started with the Philadelphia 76ers, and you were a part of the 82-83 NBA championship squad with Moses Malone, Dr. J, Julius Erving. I mean, some great talent and some superstars, icons of the NBA. What was it like playing alongside them? And what did you learn from those two that you were able to take with you the rest of your NBA career?
Well, that's where it was a real blessing for me because I grew up idolizing Dr. J. When I was at Robert Morris College, I had these two huge posters hanging on my wall at Dr. J. Every time I did an English paper or anything, I'd kind of find a way to write about Dr. J. I was like just Dr. J crazy when I was in college, having no idea that in a couple years that I would have an opportunity to be in the same locker room with him. But after red shirt and sitting out a year at the University of Detroit, I played my first year, which actually made me eligible for the draft because I spent 2 years at Robert Morris, a red shirt year at the University of Detroit. So my very first year of playing was with Terry Durod's senior year, and we had a good season that year. And actually, a lot of people forget. They remember the win over Marquette that that Vitale had, but me and Terry Durod went into Marquette and did the same thing. We beat them by the same score, 64-63 on a jump shot by Terry Durod at the top of the key. Dennis Boyd hit that same shot that won it, but that year they went to the Sweet 16. We made the tournament that year. We went on. We ended up losing in the first round of the NCAA tournaments, but we had a great year at the University of Detroit. And Durod was drafted that year by the Detroit Pistons, and I thought I had a subpar year. I was averaging double-double, around 12 points and around 10 rebounds a game, and I didn't think a whole lot about it, but I was eligible for the draft. And, I look up on draft day, and sure enough, I got drafted by the Philadelphia 76ers. So that was like a dream for me to have an opportunity to go to a team like that. I was trying to figure out what they were going to do with me because at that particular time, they had Daryl Dawkins, they had, Chocolate Thunder down there, and they had Caldwell Jones and Maurice Cheeks, and, and Andrew Toney came in with me that year, and, we had some great players. Steve Mix. I mean, that team was like Doug Collins was actually a player on that team my first year going. And back then, in the NBA, it was 11-man rosters. So I signed a non-guaranteed contract that year, and they had 11 guaranteed players. They drafted a kid out of Tennessee State named Monty Davis that led the nation in rebounding, and that was their first-round draft pick. Their roster rounded out at 11, so I had to go in there and fight for my life to get a job to play with the 76ers. But I went in and got the work done.
So I bet you could tell with all that talent amassed on that roster that you guys were on the verge of something big. I know the Sixers were knocking on the door for a while there to win an NBA championship.
Well, it was incredible because I signed my contract the day that Magic Johnson had that huge game when he went off for the 42 points and 15 rebounds, and Jamal Wilkes had 37 that particular game. I signed, and I was sitting in the stands watching that game. That's the day that I signed with them. They ended up losing the championship. The year prior to that is when they had George McGinnis, and they lost to Portland, and and all. So they were always right on the doorstep of winning championships. My first year with Philadelphia, I thought we had a chance as a rookie. I thought for sure, we was going to win a championship. We had the Boston Celtics down 3-1 that year. They ended up coming back, beating us, and we lost in the Eastern Conference Finals. Then my next year, we went on and we beat Boston the next year, which was like. And that was just too much for us because we had to get over that hump of trying to get by Boston every year. And when we beat Boston that year, I think our team was like kind of just said, this was a championship for us. We went on to play the Lakers, and we lost in 6. And then we made the big trade over the summer to bring in Moses Malone. And that was a key piece for us going on in 1983. And that's when we kind of just ran through the league and swept through the playoffs. We lost one playoff game that year, 67-17. And we won every playoff game. I think we lost one game to Milwaukee, and we swept the Lakers in 4 to win an NBA title.
So winning that championship with the Sixers wasn't your only NBA championship. You also got a ring with the 1993-94 Houston Rockets. Now, how would you compare and contrast those championship squads? How are they similar and how are they different?
Well, they're different in terms of the journey, the perseverance that you saw with the Philadelphia 76ers. I was there for 3 solid years. The stories I just told you, the things that we went through, I always cherish the 76ers championship because that was my first one. and plus the work was put in. I had an opportunity to have a special moment in that championship series in Game 2 when I went in and had to guard Kareem, and I actually did that 2 years in a row. But the year that we won it, I threw a sky hook over Kareem, which was it's probably my fondest memory of being a Sixer, and we went on to win that championship. Then years later, I had an opportunity. I got picked up by the Houston Rockets, and that was another great team. I played with another one of the greatest centers in the league, in Hakeem Olajuwon, that Moses Malone had mentored, when he first came into the league, and he turned out to be a great player. I saw a show every night with him and Otis Thorpe and Kenny Smith and Sam Cassell and Robert Horry and all of those guys and Mario Elie and Carl Herrera. We had a great team down there, the team that matched together and played together, and we made a run that year and ended up winning. I won another NBA championship.
You play with so many great players. I mean, you were lucky enough to play with so many great players, including Zeke, Isaiah Thomas with the Pistons. You spent 3 seasons in Motown. What was it like playing for Motor City's pro basketball franchise?
Well, it was great me to have that opportunity to come home to my family and all my friends. That was like a dream for me. I mean, I was thrilled in Philadelphia because we had such a great team. Detroit wasn't so good when I first got here, but like you said, those 3 years with Isaiah was amazing. Isaiah was a special athlete. He was a special player for Detroit, and he kind of willed his way. And you talk about all the great players that were in the league. Magic kind of fell into a gold mine going with Kareem and those type of guys, when they came in the league there. But Isaiah had a team that was kind of built around him, When I first came to Detroit, they wasn't the bad boys. They was the little boys back then. You had Benny Johnson, and he wasn't the microwave back then. He wasn't. They didn't have those names, and it was Ken Benson, Kelly Tapuka, myself, and even though Rick Mahorn was here, and but we managed to make it. And I looked at the team the first year I came in, and Isaiah was talking about a championship the first year that I got here. That's how focused he was, and that's where his mind was at. And I looked around the locker room, and I had been to the finals 2 times already, and I was saying to myself, no, I don't think this team's going to be able to win a championship. I was coming in with major minutes compared to not getting a lot of minutes when I was in Philadelphia, but when here in Detroit, I was right in the rotation, and I was getting good minutes playing for them. But I was a strong believer after that first year with Isaiah because we won 49 games, and we went to the playoffs. We came back the next year. We went to the playoffs again. All 3 years here, we had teams that was 40-plus wins and a playoff team with the players we had. And then they found Dennis Rodman, they found Sally, and that team just got bigger and better. And unfortunately for me, I didn't get an opportunity to win that championship here in Detroit. But they were 3 great years that I'll never forget because of my family and my friends and the opportunity to play everything in my own hometown.
So by the end of your tenure with the Pistons, you could tell that the Pistons were on the verge of winning something, of becoming the back-to-back champions that they did end up becoming?
Oh, there's no question about it. And a real main reason for that is because of Isaiah Thomas. He was a true winner. He had won in college, NCAA tournament. And on his mind, that's all he talked about was winning championships. That's what he was about. It wasn't about no individual accolades or anything like that. The only thing he had on his mind was to win a championship. And he willed his way to taking that team with the great pieces of watching Bill Laimbeer become one of the top centers in the league and adding some solid pieces, picking up, Sally and picking up Dennis Rodman and those type of guys. And eventually, Rick Mahorn came in. I got a chance to play with him my last year when I was here in Detroit. So that team right there was put together and structured, and they became the bad boys. And, of course, Vinnie Johnson, John Long, and then another great thing was about that I had a chance to play with my college teammates and John Long and Terry Tyler.
Very cool right there, huh?
Yes, no question about it. All 3 of us were, University of Detroit guys playing right on the Detroit Pistons.
So who was the best player that you ever played alongside in the NBA?
Wow, that's a tough question right there, considering I went to Chicago after I left here and played with Michael Jordan. And considering I was with Olajuwon and I was with Moses and I was with Doc and, I played with so many great players. I like to say Michael was probably, and obviously probably the best all-around player. Don't want to discredit Isaiah because, it was a thrill. I saw things I never saw. The most impressive player I ever played with, and I always say this and people look at me, was Tyrone Muggsy Bogues. I played with him in Charlotte at 5'3", the most incredible athlete I ever seen. 14 years in the NBA, point guard that did some amazing things at that size. It was unbelievable to see a guy like that perform for 14 years in the NBA. I'm still friends with him to this day, but I was so impressed with just because of the size factor, but the heart was a lot bigger than what the size was, and he let people know. A lot of people, to me, I think Muggsy Bogues should be a Hall of Famer because there never be another guy at 5'3" that accomplished what he accomplished in the NBA.
Now, I'm also curious, too, because I love those Houston teams back in the 90s with Olajuwon. What was it like playing for Rudy Tomjanovich?
That was another area where I was blessed in. I had great coaches. Rudy T from Hamtramck, Michigan, here from Michigan. He was a guy that he was a coach's a player's coach. Players love playing. Rudy told it how it was. He kept everything simple, and he wanted to win, and it was a great guy to play for. I got a chance to play for Chuck Daly. I got a chance to play for Billy Cunningham. I got a chance to play briefly for Doug Collins. So I played for some of the top coaches that coached this game of basketball.
When you say players coach, take us a little bit inside. What does that mean? Does that mean like he kind of knows if the players are, going through tough practices and kind of lets them off just a little bit, kind of knows what's going on with each player, treats each player like an individual? What's it like to play for a players coach?
When I say players coach, that means you can't find 5 players that say I didn't like playing for Chuck Daly. I mean, you can't. I don't think you can go around and you can't find too many players that say I didn't enjoy that experience. And you're exactly right. He knew how he knew how to gauge players. He knew how to communicate. He wasn't a screamer, wasn't a yeller, but he knew how to get his point across. He knew how to step back and let other people do things that he couldn't do. He had a good offensive coach and good defensive coach, and he kind of controlled the whole system that was being ran. And he did a great job of that. He knew how to push people's buttons. He was a great communicator. He was more of a psychologist than a coach, because he had to understand each personality. And, you had some real personalities, as you know, with the bad boys. When you got a Lambeer and you got an Isaiah Thomas and you got a Benny Johnson that thought he should have been a starter and probably should have been with any other team in the league. And you got these type of personalities, and you got a Dennis Rodman, and you got to think about it. You got to be a little bit more than a coach when you're coaching guys like that.
And tell me about Pat Riley. What was it like going up against his teams and things like that? What would you know? What would you need to do to go up against a team that was coached by Pat Riley?
Well, Pat was a fierce competitor. He had some great players down there, and he was a guy that drove his players to the max. He got everything out of them. Pat Riley had a lot of help because he had a guy by the name of Magic Johnson that ran his show for him. That was an extension of what a coach should be. And Pat Riley was at a young age just taking over that job. Before Pat Riley came in, they had a guy named Paul Westhead that right now is probably responsible for the way the game is right now. I have a good relationship with Paul Westhead as well, because I coached with him down in the ABA and I learned his offense. He's one of the first guys that revved it up, and he made the game different. He had guys out of position, and he had a running game where you ran and you shot and you pressed and you trapped for 40 minutes of basketball. And unfortunate for him, he didn't get it figured out till he willed his way to a couple championships. He won one with the Lakers right before Pat Riley took over, and Pat Riley kind of took that system and kind of modified that system and made it his own system. But you have to give Paul Westhead a lot of credit for the style of basketball and what he brought, and it's still holding true. If you look at a Golden State Warrior, Houston Rocket team, and the first thing you think about is you remember that Loyola team where they averaged all those points in college, and Paul Westhead was like one of the first guys to come out and make the madness out on the basketball court, and he definitely would do anything he could to junk a game up and to make a game go as fast as it could go.
Now, when we have opportunities to talk to former athletes, we love talking about the camaraderie, what it's like in the locker room, traveling the country with a young group of men and things like that. What team would you say was the closest that you were on, and are there any stories that you can share regarding being on the road, hanging with the fellas off the court?
Wow. I mean, my Philadelphia team, it's going to be 35 years right now. We still stay in close contact with each other right now. We have an email account that, Andrew Toney runs, and we all keep track of everything that everybody's doing. We still a close group of guys 35 years later. We had a great time. Everybody knew exactly what their role was on that team. Everybody was happy on that team, which is very rare when you can find a team like that where, guys know exactly what their place is and what they had to do. And I think everybody was happy with what they did. So that team right there was a close-knit group of guys that worked together and accomplished the goal that Philadelphia Loan was going after. And, I can never forget playing those 3 years with that group of guys right there. That's Bobby Jones, and, Caldwell Jones was a huge influence. And fortunately, he was traded away before we won the championship. But I came into the league with a lot of veteran players with, like Daryl Dawkins and Caldwell Jones and Steve Mix. And, when you're a young guy and Dr. J, you come in with those type of guys, you learn a whole lot. You learn what the game is about real fast and real quick. And, and Bobby Jones, like one of the great players that Maurice Cheeks, as you know, was coached here for a while, was our leader and point guard of that team. And then Andrew Toney was amazing. That was my roommate, and we came in our rookie year together. So I still talk to those guys. Me and Andrew talk twice a week, and we still all stay in contact. And every time Maurice hit town, I'm down to see him and talk to him. So that was one of the great teams. And obviously, coming back to Detroit, playing with my teammates and playing with Isaiah and Lambier and those guys was another great team. And that Houston team, what can I say? I was blessed to play with a lot of good players, and it was some down moments. I did spend a year with the Clippers.
That was tough. Back then, I know it was tough.
Once 12 games the first year I was there, and 17 games out of 82. So I got a chance to see both sides of the coin. And that was rough. I knew what was more important, and winning was more important than getting a lot of playing time.
Yeah, there was no Blake Griffin or Chris Paul with those Clippers.
Definitely was nobody down there then. All those guys turned out to be some coaches. Mike Whitson's around in the league coaching right now. Larry Drew's a coach in the league right now. So Mike Cage, I think, is a broadcaster. So Quentin Daly. So some of those guys, but we didn't win many basketball games with that group.
Now, a lot of our fans know that you're talking with us. Everybody has blown up our Twitter page. They want to know. Tell us the story about dunking on Patrick Ewing. They want to know. I mean, literally 50 messages. Make sure you ask Earl the Twirl dunking on Patrick Ewing.
Well, I got caught in a good situation on that. Patrick entered an inbound pass that, I turned around and caught it. He came in and, he jumped at the wrong time. I was a pretty high riser back then, so I caught it, and Patrick was caught up in whether he wanted to jump or go up, and I ended up just smashing it right on top of him, and I guess it's gone viral now. Patrick's a good friend. By no means I talked to him about it, because years later I remember playing against him in Charlotte, and he came into Charlotte and dropped like 50-some points one game. So Patrick was a great player, and he's coaching down at Georgetown right now, so he's doing a good job with that.
Quite the moment, though, and to remember dunking over Patrick Ewing.
Well, no question about it. That was a good moment. I'm playing with Michael Jordan, and we had some good battles. And if I'm not wrong, I think Patrick might have been in his rookie year when that happened to him. So, yeah, so that was a highlight. There's no question
Absolutely,
about it. Yeah.
It would be.
Yeah.
Now, I like how you brought up that this guy right here maybe could be a coach, because he's a psychologist by day.
Yeah.
Stroking his ego. I know he felt really good about that comment. But you're right about reeling in personalities, getting these players, right, these star players to check their egos at the door, and it's easier said than done now. And I know you got the chance to become an assistant and then a head coach in the ABA with the Long Beach Jam, an assistant in the WNBA, and with numerous teams, including the Detroit Shock in 2009 when Rick Mahorn became the head coach. So you served on his coaching staff.
Right.
But first and foremost, how did those coaches that you had throughout your pro basketball career help mold you into the coach that you became as an assistant and as a head man?
Well, you try to learn a little bit from each one of them. I had guys that were kind of similar. Billy Cunningham was probably one of the hardest, direct, like just hard-nosed, drive you, a perfectionist type coach that I had. Chuck Daly, though, I spent 4 years with. Incredible guy. I love him to this day. He was an assistant when I first went to Philly. A lot of people don't know, I know Chuck better than anybody can know in Detroit. Chuck was an assistant coach under Billy Cunningham, and he wasn't daddy rich back then. We called him Big Money Grip back in the day because he didn't have no money then. So, but he had a way with people. I mean, talking to him, he knew how to. He was a great communicator. He knew how to push the buttons when he had to do it. He was always calm. He understood when a player was upset, and he knew to stay away from him. He'd give him a chance to cool down. He'd come back and talk to him. He understood what practice would mean. He understood that you're only going to get attention span for a certain period of time. You would have an hour and a half practice with Chuck, and he would tell you before practice start that we're going to go for an hour and a half. And he would name the 5 or 6 things that he wanted to concentrate and work on. And he would tell you, it's up to you guys. I don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. If we get it done in an hour and a half, I guarantee you won't see me. We're starting right now, and it's 3 o'clock, and at 4:30, if you see me at 4:30, then you'll be surprised because I'm going to be out of here. And I want you guys to come in and give me everything you got for an hour and a half. And guys bought into that. They come to practice and they work their butt off for an hour and a half, and that way you got a lot accomplished. A lot of coaches that keep you for 3 hours and they lose you after the first hour and a half, and those other time is just wasted time there. So he was really good at doing that in preparations and getting prepared. And he had no ego. He would step back and he would let his assistant coaches do their job. He would let whoever was the defensive coach or the offensive coach. That's what he would let. He would oversee it, but he would let them run it. So he was good. He was nice and calm, and I think most players they are a reflection of what their coaches are, and the way he was able to stay calm and command respect from each one of his players, he got it back.
So now back to one of Chuck Daly's former bad boys, in Rick Mahorn. What was it like being on his coaching staff in '09 with the Detroit Shock?
Well, I think Rick was similar, and he learned a lot. Me and Rick came in the league together. We both were rookies, and he was in Washington, and that's what me and Rick actually met on the basketball court because neither one of us was getting any playing time. So we met in the games that we played because we both would get garbage time because he played under Wes Unseld and Alvin Hayes, and he bagged those guys up. And obviously I was with Doc and all those. So we used to get in the game, and we were like, hey, man, we got to find a way to get some playing time. So we got to score some buckets out here on the court. So, we met, right on the court right there. And Rick, he learned a lot. Rick was always a clever player, a unique type player because, Rick wasn't fast. Rick didn't jump high, but he had a unique body. So he had to think the game more so than use his athleticism to play the game, pulling a cheer on Kevin McHale, knowing how to tick people off and get under people's skins and, knowing how rebounds come underneath the basket and above the rim and using his size and his strength and using his mind. And I think that carried on to him to become a pretty good coach. As you see, this summer he won the Big Three coaching that team there. And we went to the Eastern Conference Finals with the Shock the year that he had the team here. And hopefully one day he'll get back in it again because, I think he can make a real good coach in the NBA.
So in the time that you spent as an assistant in the WNBA, from all of your different experiences, how would you say the WNBA and the NBA are both similar and different to one another? Well,
the WNBA is, the one thing about the ladies, they run their plays, they run their offense. It was so much fun, being around them. Obviously, you don't have the athleticism that they have in the NBA. They don't jump as high. They don't run as fast, but they will run a play to perfection. It's probably some better shooters. I had a chance to be around Diana Taurasi, which is I have huge respect for. One of the greatest athletes. I won't even say woman basketball player because she was like incredible. Her work habits, and it's obviously from all the things she's accomplished throughout her career, but the time and the effort and the passion that she had from the game was off the charts. I would put her up against any guy as far as shooting the basketball. And every day that I would walk in that gym, early in the morning, she would be the first one in there. She'd probably work out an hour before practice start, getting her shots up and doing her thing every day. And then she would come and go through a practice. She drove her teammates, and she's a true winner. And it's obvious that, she's still going right now and she's still competitive. But, women's basketball is, it's a beauty to watch, watch these girls. In fact, they execute so much, sometimes too much, because they'll pass up an open shot, and you got to let them know that, to take their shots when they got to have them. So me and Rick, we really enjoyed it. The girls were, fantastic. I just hoping that more young ladies, start getting involved and start watching and get more support. My daughter's playing at Georgetown right now. I'm happy to say that, not the fact that she's playing, but the fact that she's at Georgetown too. So
that's a great school.
She's getting a chance to walk on and have an opportunity. The Big East tournament's coming up this week. They play Villanova. Not getting a lot of playing time, but it's just a pleasure to see her out there warming up and being a part of a team.
So you coached in the ABA too, and you guided the Long Beach Jam to an ABA title and had the chance to coach former NBA stars, including, I want to talk about this guy, the Worm, Dennis Rodman. What was he like to coach?
Well, I tell you, that was a great experience for me, and I had some great coaches with me. Scott Brooks, I coached under him for a year. He's on to be a great NBA coach now, and I mentioned Paul Westhead that, I learned his offense, and, we had a great time doing that. So I spent 2 years with those guys learning it, and then I took over a team myself where I had some good players. By me being a journeyman in the league and a bench player, and all these guys were trying to reach the next level of the NBA, it kind of it was a perfect fit for me because I knew what it took to survive. I knew what it took to make it to the next level. And these guys that I had, that's what their goal was, is to try to get to the next level. And I could kind of pinpoint certain areas where they needed to work, things that they needed to do to improve their game, and things that would get them over the hump. And I was pretty successful at that. The fact the year that I coached that team, I had Gino Carlisle that went on to the Portland Trail Blazers for a stint. I had Matt Barnes that has been around the league forever now. I had DeMar Johnson that came back from a car injury, got himself back together and went on to play in the NBA. I had Derek Dow that was local here out of Eastern Michigan that got picked up and played a couple years in the NBA. I had a kid by the name of Joaquin Hawkins that played for the Houston Rockets that I kind of handpicked him myself knew that he had the talent to be able to be a pro, and he ended up playing for Rudy, and I put some calls in for him and got him a tryout, and he ended up not only playing for the Houston Rockets, but starting for them. I had one of the best Japanese players in the history of Japan, Yuta Tabusi, that ended up playing for the Phoenix Suns for a year. So I had a bunch of great players that played for me down there on that team. Janelle Pargo came down and played for me for a short stint, and then I was blessed to pick up Dennis Rodman that came in, and he was trying to make a comeback and get back in the league. And, it's easy to coach Dennis because, Dennis is going to go out and he's going to grab you, 15, 16 rebounds a game. He's going to pack the house because people came out to see him, and that was huge for us to have him down in the ABA. He didn't play a whole lot of games, but the games he came in, he played in the championship game for us, and he might have pulled down 14 or 15 rebounds that game. He was pretty much at the end of his career, but, I didn't know when he was, going to show up. I didn't worry about him coming to practice. I learned that part from Chuck Daly. Because Chuck, if Dennis missed practice, Chuck would always ask Dennis, hey, which car didn't start today? Because he never worried about that, and Chuck would always say, is Dennis different? Yeah, he's different because we got nobody in this locker room that can do what Dennis do. That's what makes him different.
As a fan of NBA basketball, what's your assessment now of the current league? Because when you look at it, you got supremely talented individuals, but a bunch of them are now working together, and there's a handful of teams at the top. And it seems like the disparity between those that are championship contenders and those at the bottom, it seems like there's two classes right now in the NBA, those that are title contenders and those that are basically racing to the bottom and tanking. What's your assessment now of the current state of the NBA with these super teams and kind of where a lot of teams are trying to race to the bottom?
I don't think people really realize when they say super teams because the NBA always consisted of super teams. I just mentioned some of the teams. You look at that Philadelphia team, what did we have? We had 2 MVPs of the league on the same team with Moses Malone and Dr. J. And then you add a Bobby Jones and an Andrew Toney. We had 3 or 4 All-Stars on that team. You go back, I can go back to the Lakers team with Jerry West and with Wilt Chamberlain and with Elgin Baylor. That was a super team. So you think about it and you think about the history of the game and, even with, the Lakers team with Magic Johnson and Kareem and Jamal Wilkes and Norm Nixon. All those guys were all-stars, and they all were super teams. So, but it just wasn't, we wasn't hugging and kissing each other and meeting, and we wasn't talking about it in the off-season and talking about joining up and doing those type of things. But you had great players on all those teams even back then. The game has definitely changed now. The rules have changed now. It's became more entertainment than it was a grind-out, basketball game where anybody was capable of winning games for you on any given night. In our time, you come to a game, and it could be a guy that come into a game that, would be win a game for you. It'd be a Clint Richardson or it'd be a Earl Cureton that would be impactful, out on the court that would win a basketball game. Basketball became pretty predictable now when you go to a game and you see the big three and they do their thing. They come down to the fourth quarter and it's more entertainment now. And I think we were more skilled back then. I think guys coming into the league young, they actually got to learn the game. It takes them 2 or 3 years. It's very rare you find a few that come in and they're ready to go right away. But the process is usually a couple years before those guys develop into quality players.
Do you want to see the Cavs and the Warriors potentially for the 4th straight time in the finals? A lot of people that message us are like, we're kind of losing interest. It's the same 2 teams, but I think it's a magnificent feat when you look at LeBron James. I think would be 7, 8 consecutive finals. I think we got to give him the respect that's due for getting to the finals that many times. But at the same time, when we look at fans here in Detroit, it's always about the come up, and we're waiting for that next group to come up. Do you think the likes of a Boston, a Toronto, or maybe a Houston can step up and maybe dethrone the top teams right now?
Well, it's a lot of parity, in the East. It's no question about it. I know Boston is, winning a lot of games, but that Toronto team is pretty impressive, as we saw last night. They're capable of very, well coming. Washington, another team that, that could surprise some people and come out. And you look at the West and, Golden State, if they stay healthy, that's a tough team to beat. Even though the Houston Rockets is making a case right now. If they continue to keep playing the way they're playing, with Chris Paul, going with Harden now, those players playing together and they got good chemistry. Mike D'Antoni is another old teammate of mine. We didn't talk about my European career, but I played with some great players in Milan. Mike D'Antoni was one of my teammates over in Milan, and Bob McAdoo was on the same team. And Dino Meneghin, that's in the Hall of Fame here, is one of the best Italian players to ever play. And I had the opportunity to play with him. But Mike was a great guy, and he's a great coach. And he likes that running style, that up and down pace. And he's doing a good job with those Houston Rockets right now. So it is some teams out here that's entertaining. We always fall asleep on San Antonio. When playoff time starts, that Pop's going to be, he's going to be in the running for things out there. So it could be interesting. It's going to be some real interesting things coming up come playoff time.
And Kawhi's coming back in March now, supposedly.
Right.
So he makes a huge difference. We know that much,
well,
too.
they're always quiet. You never, like San Antonio is that team that, you just take a sleeping pill on them. And, and you look up and, and they'll hit the playoffs. And then all of a sudden Pop pulls it out of his hat and they knock off one of the big teams in the league. And you look up and San Antonio's right there in the finals. And when you talk about winning championships, you have to talk about San Antonio because they're one of the teams that's been, been a constant stay in the NBA Finals.
So you stated it yourself. The style of play has changed from the 80s and 90s, and for a lot of guys that played in the 80s and 90s like yourself, you see a huge stylistic difference in play in the NBA. And a lot of guys from the 80s and 90s don't like the style of play now. What are your thoughts on how it has changed over time, and are you a fan of how the game is played nowadays?
Well, let's take one example. Let's take an Isaiah Thomas and a Stephen Curry. I don't know the stats, but if you took Isaiah's stats and Stephen Curry's stats from the first 3 years, I would want to say that Isaiah might have had the edge. I don't think a lot of young people understand that. And they had the edge in an era where the game was more physical, where, if you came down and you pulled up and you hit 3 shots in a row on the 4th shot, you might go through the floor. Somebody may take you out. If you drove down the lane, you might get 30 stitches in your head going down the lane. So we had big guys that played with their backs to the basket. Everybody had a big center in the league that dominated. And now that's, evolved to stretch 4s and 5s. And they kind of cleaned the game up now where, you can't really touch anybody anymore. What would an Isaiah Thomas be like in an era like it is right now where you couldn't hit him, where he didn't get banged and he didn't get bumped? He did what he did in a league that was a physical, knockdown, drag-it-out type league. Can a Stephen Curry survive, in a league like it is right now? Would he be able to do the things that he do? Would a Westbrook last for 82 games the way he takes the ball to the basket? And when we had the Rick Mahorns and the Wes Unsells and the Alvin Hayes standing, the Bob Laniers and them type of guys standing in the lane, would they allow those things to happen? You can't compare eras, but, you look back and you think about the way the game was playing. That's why it's hard to go from one generation of players to the next because things were definitely different as far as rules and as far as the way players played the game.
Well, guys like Isaiah probably could have better numbers. And I know you're getting at that, and it's hard to say for sure. Obviously, we can't compare eras. But still, you think Isaiah Thomas, how great he was in the 80s, 90s. If he played nowadays, he probably could put up the Steph Curry numbers. And not the three-point numbers. I know he didn't have that three-point shooting prowess. But overall scoring numbers across the board, Isaiah would be maybe even way higher than Steph Curry at this point in Steph Curry's career.
We all remember that game down at Joe Louis Arena where he scored all those points in a minute and 33 seconds. I mean, he had some shows that he put on that a lot of people as time go on and forget about. But he was an incredible player that did some incredible things in his time.
What do you make now of the current 2018 Detroit Pistons with the addition of Blake Griffin?
Well, I think it's like kind of a wait-and-see type situation. You put 2 great players together. Andre Drummond obviously is evolving into a great player now. He's a 2-time All-Star. With Blake Griffin, you just hope that he's able to stay healthy. You wonder if he's the same guy he was 5 years ago because he pretty much relied on a lot of athleticism. He's had a lot of injuries over the last couple of years. But at the same time, you bring a little bit of star power to the city of Detroit. And I think you just got to wait and see how that situation is going to work out and what they add to it. In comparisons, you kind of look at Jordan and him playing together for the Clippers, and they had Chris Paul. The success that they had was not a whole lot of success. They were knocked out of the playoffs every year in the first round, and then Chris Paul took off and left, and the team kind of, So now you got that same kind of. I would say Andre and Jordan are similar the way they play, and you add Blake Griffin to that, you kind of got the same dynamics with those 2 players playing together. So I think it's kind of a wait and see what you add with it, how they learn how to play with each other.
And speaking of that dynamic in the front court with Drummond, with Blake Griffin, how huge is it to also get Reggie Jackson back, fully healthy, to get him at point guard and playing alongside that big-time duo in the front court?
Well, it'll be interesting to see how those guys mold together and work together. But the thing about it is not going to be magic. It takes time for those guys to learn how to play with each other. And every time you see a trade, you see something like that happen, it always take a little bit of time for those guys to get used to each other and learn how to play together. Even when they put the big 3 together in Miami, they kind of struggled. I know they got there, but they couldn't win it in that first year because they really had to get a feel, and guys got to take roles and got to understand who they are. basketball is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. Teams, and every team have to have guys. They have to know their roles. And that's why I cherish our Philadelphia 76er team, because everybody knew their place and knew what they had to do. And you get it done as a team, because individuals will never win championships for you.
So, Earl, you've stayed in tune with basketball over the years in a variety of roles, including as an assistant, obviously, as a color commentator, including for Detroit Mercy men's basketball games where we met officially, right. Also as a Detroit Pistons community ambassador. And then I also love this story that you went back and got your bachelor's degree in 2011 from Detroit Mercy. And I read, now this might not be true, but that you came back and got your degree because you had promised your mother way back that you had wanted to finish up your college degree. What made it the right time for you to come back when you did? And then how fulfilling of an experience was that for you and your family?
Well, I never lost sight of doing it. Even when I was all these places I've been, I played 15 years of professional basketball, but I neglected something that was extremely important. My mother, she didn't have an opportunity to go to school. My mother will be 101 March 29th. And back in those times, she was born in 1917, I want to say, and she didn't have an opportunity. She couldn't even go to school. And I just felt a huge embarrassment for me not to be able to finish my college degree, knowing that she didn't have. My father, he never had a chance to go to school, period, at all either. I just felt that was an obligation and something I need to feel, because I had not only an opportunity to go, I had a scholarship to go. So I felt a strong commitment to be able to do that. And even the fact that I'm going to be out, talking to our youth and communicating the importance of education to them every day, I knew that was something that had to be accomplished. And just so that I could let kids know, because sports, we know it only lasts for a short period of time. It's only something that you do. It's a privilege for you to be able to have that, but your education is a must. And I wanted to put myself in a situation not only to please my mother, but to be a role model to all of our youth.
So I know all three of us will be around for Motor City Madness, which is rapidly approaching, happening March 2nd through 6th at Little Caesars Arena. And with that being said, I already brought up how you've called Detroit Mercy men's basketball games throughout this season. How would you evaluate the season, the regular season that Detroit Mercy did have?
Well, it's been a rough year. There's no question about that. A lot of, some distractions, throughout the course of the year. The team really never got a chance to gel the way I thought they could have. I think their record don't indicate the talent level that they got. They got some guys on that team that can flat out score the basketball. They probably got 6 guys on that team that had 30-plus games. When we saw Prince get that the last game that he played in, we seen Josh, go off for 30 points, and Corey Allen go off for like 39 points. Jaleel Hogan with 38 points last year. So the offensive power is there. There's no question about it. They got some guys on that team, and bringing in even a young Jermaine Jackson that came in this year and had a couple 30-point games that he played in. So it's a matter of getting those guys together, getting them to learn a defensive system that Bakari is trying to work with them to be able to learn. They got to become a better defensive team. They got to keep building on what they got there. But it was a little disappointing, I have to say, to watch them lose the number of games that they did lose this year. I know the Horizon League is coming up, so we'll see. Things can happen in the Horizon League playoffs. It's one and done, and we've seen teams come out of nowhere and walk down there to the tournament, and they got a perfect opportunity because it's going to be played down at Little Caesars Arena.
Now, Earl, a lot of young people listen to our podcast, and I know when we talk about basketball, I'm of the opinion that always defense wins championships. And obviously, the kids nowadays, they just want to score the basketball, they want to dunk, they want to shoot the three. If someone's listening and you can give them advice on how to improve on defense, how can we get these kids to play better defense? How can we get them to put forth the effort? Because you can make a solid living in the NBA if you're a solid defender. How do we get the level of defense up across NBA basketball and even down to the colleges?
Well, I work Greg Kelser's camp every summer. We do about 4 camps throughout the city every summer. And I get an opportunity. I'm there pretty much, for the whole 4 weeks. And I get a chance to talk to a lot of youth. And I always tell them the importance of having a well-rounded game. And I always tell them how I survived and made it in the NBA. And it wasn't because of offensive ability. It's because I was able to guard multiple positions from the 3 to the 4 to the 5. Defense is something that anybody can do it's all about hard work and desire. It's all about wanting the ball and being a good rebounder, wanting the ball more than anybody else out on the court. And so I always talk about the intangibles that you need to be able to learn how to do that can help you have a job. It's not about going out getting 30 points or 40 points a game. And, and I used to talk to my minor league players about that. One of the reasons why Joaquin Hawkins made it in the NBA, because my players thought I was crazy because Joaquin Hawkins came off the bench for me. but he was a guy that could win games for you on the defensive end of the floor. He could guard multiple positions. He was 28 years old, but he could guard a 1, a 2, a 3, and for a short period of time, he could guard a 4. And for me, I never seen a guy that could step into a game and take charges like he did at the end of ball games and be impactful on that side of the court. And that's the guy that I picked. And they looked at me and I said, well, this guy right here could definitely be an NBA player. I said, you guys are dreaming because they pay guys millions of dollars to score 20 points a night, but they don't have guys that can come in off the bench and do the intangibles. And sure enough, he ended up being in that spot. So I encourage the young kids out here, to work on all aspects of your game. Do the things that nobody else want to do. Dennis Rodman found something that, hey, he took it. He just quit shooting the back. He concentrated in one area, and he excelled like never before in that area and became one of the greatest rebounders in basketball. So look at some things that people don't like to do, things that's possible for you to do, and work hard at it because you never know. That can take you a long ways.
More of the dirty work at times, crashing the boards, playing the solid D. I think of Ben Wallace as well, about what he became. He was a no-offense guy, truly, but was a great rebounder, great shot blocker, rim protector, and look at what he became.
Hard work. When you talk to, Ben Wallace and Dennis Rodman, those guys, they put the work in. Nobody can stop you from working hard. That's something you got control over. Every time you step on the floor, if you give 110% and you're working hard, nobody can control that but you.
So now I read that you're taking part in the Motor City Madness Champions Brunch, Tuesday, March 6th, 10 a.m., Little Caesars Arena. And you have a few other guys taking part with you in this session. And what do you know about it so far and what it will exactly entail?
Well, it's going to be a Q&A session. I'm down there with James Buddha Edwards and Rock and Rick Mahorn. We had an opportunity to get in there, and all those guys know what championships are all about. I think we all in that room have championships on our hands. So I think we're going to do a nice Q&A session down there. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed because my daughter's in that Big East. I'm hoping that, I talk to them. If she gets to the finals of the Big East, I'm going to have a big decision to make.
It will be then. I feel you with that, definitely.
Right. Yeah.
And then Lauren Jabara is moderating the session. We know Lauren as well, local media personality.
She's doing a great job. I watch her at Oakland University games, and she's really excelling in that area as being a sideline reporter. And our basketball knowledge seems to get keener. Every game that she goes out, I've been keeping an eye. I told her that the other night when I saw her that I was impressed with her skill level.
Speaking of the NCAA, do you think with what's been going on with the investigations, they'll actually take a look and look to seriously fix what's going on? It seems like the NCAA has been taking some hits in the last 10 years.
Well, I think it's a lot of adjustments that's going to have to be made. Some of the stuff is to the extreme. Obviously, giving a kid $100,000 in college, and that's. Now what I do disagree with the NCAA, if a kid's needs a coat and he's cold, and if a kid's hungry and he needs a meal, I don't think they should be deprived, and I don't think it should be a violation for a kid to be able to have those things. Some of these kids come from different backgrounds and low income families, and they don't have the money to be able to do the things. And we look at it at the end of the day, the NCAA is making a huge profit, off of what these kids do in college basketball. Obviously, we know they get a free education to go to school there, but I don't know if you take that free education and compare it to the television contracts and all of the money that the NCAA brings in now. So I think it's got to be a strong look, and I think they need to find a way to try to do some things to help these kids because they are products that's that's bringing in a whole lot of money for a whole lot of people, and maybe they should be taken care of a little bit better. I think they really need to look at that. You saw that Fab Five thing, and you talked about Chris Webber and the trendsetters that they were, and how everywhere, Chris Webber said he would walk in and see his jersey for sale in the windows, and his, the pants that he was wearing, and then he couldn't even go out and get dinner. So when you look at that, then you see, says, why I'm here. Everybody's getting paid but me. It's like I gotta go do something about it. And guys had to leave early and go into the NBA. So. There's some adjustments that got to be made. There's no question on both ends. I don't agree with the just outright cheating and outright, but it's got to be a way legally and a right way to be able to do it where both win-win for both parts.
Yeah, I think of these universities too. They're making so much money off of these players, using their likeness without the players' names on the back of these jerseys. And I think in football as well, collegiately, Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M. Those jerseys are selling like hotcakes, and he couldn't benefit at all from any of the sales of those jerseys.
Right, and that's a problem right there. They're using them to profit, and yet what they'll come back with is, okay, well, they're getting a free education. But I don't know if that adds up. Especially when you're talking about a guy like Johnny Mansell or Chris Webber or Jalen Rose and those type of guys.
Now, before we let you go, let's play a round of Let's Get to Know Earl. Couple of quick hitters things that we just get to know you and our audience gets to know you a little bit better. Are you a Pepsi or a Coke guy?
I just have to say Coke.
Last movie that you saw in the theater?
What was the last movie? Black Panther. I just went to see Black Panther. Yeah, I went to see that.
If you didn't play basketball, what would it have been that you played?
Wow. I was a cross-country runner when I was in high school. I don't know if I would have pursued that, though, as a future. I mean, I was strictly a basketball guy. I loved the game of basketball. I didn't take a strong interest. I was too small to be a football player. I always thought about being a receiver, though. I was pretty fast and could run. I always looked at that part of it, but too many legs there. So probably would have been a track guy if I hadn't gotten involved in basketball.
What's your favorite sport to watch outside of basketball?
Wow. I like football. I like the NFL. I'm pretty hype when it comes down to, Super Bowl and that type of thing. Baseball is a long, lengthy season. At the end of the season in October, it kind of heats up for me. But actually, I sit at home and watch a lot of WNBA games. I coached in it, but I do have some joy. And my friends think how can you? I said, well, I like it, so.
Lafayette, Coney Island, or American Coney Island?
Oh, man. Wow. I'm going to go with Lafayette.
And I guess I'll leave you with this. Now, it's not a getting to know Earl kind of deal, but what's the biggest sales pitch that you can make regarding the Motor City Madness and how we can get people to show up for these games?
Well, it's going to be an exciting brand of basketball. To have the Horizon League, right here in the city of Detroit, it's going to be affordable pricing for you to come down there and see a number of games. And the Horizon League has been a pretty exciting league. We had a lot of pros with the likes of when Butler was in there. When you had Haywood Gordon and those guys playing in the Horizon League. And it's been some pros that come out of there. It's a good chance for you to come and see good mid-major basketball with some up-and-coming stars that you may not be familiar with. The doors open down there and you come in there and you see great teams. And what could be better when you got two of your local teams right here with Detroit Mercy and Oakland University is going to be in the building down there. It's a must-see. If I'm giving it a Vitale pitch, you can't miss it, baby. It's going to be exciting. There's going to be some primetime players down there. So get your tickets and get them early and come down and watch the Horizon League playoffs.
You can follow Earl on Twitter at Earl the Twirl. Anything else you'd like to plug or anything anywhere else people can find you and the things that you're involved in at Detroit Mercy or in the community?
Well, with the Pistons, I have to give shout outs to our owner and Tom Gores and as well as Aaron Tellum for all of the great things that they're doing since moving back to Detroit. I just did a good appearance today with Rise where we're doing some interaction with with the police and the community and with some of our youth in inner city high schools and trying to develop that relationship back. The Alliance have teamed up with us to put together speaking panels and let the kids express themselves about how they feel about their communities and how they feel about their relationships with the police departments. And, we just had a great Black History Month with the Detroit Pistons as well. Is looking at some of our black leaders in the community and acknowledging them and, during the course of games. We teamed up with PAL. It's just a number of great programs that we're getting involved with. Me, as an ambassador of the community, I get a chance to go out and I get a chance to communicate with a lot of our youth. Even with Farm Bureau, we're doing the makeovers inside the classrooms. We have a contest every year that we go in, and that's another great thing that we're doing because it gives an inner city school. We did a school, I think, on the east side where I grew up at. Not far from where I grew up. They hadn't had a library in 10 years, and we went in and did a makeover and put a library back in there. So it's things that, and they're going to continue to keep improving and doing big things, in the city of Detroit. And I have to give our ownership, Tom Gores is really walking the walk when he said he wanted the Pistons to be impactful throughout the community and throughout Michigan. And we have done a lot of positive things in our community, and we want to continue to keep doing those things.
And Motor City Madness for the Horizon League Men's and Women's Basketball Championships once again taking place March 2nd through 6th at Little Caesars Arena. And with that, Earl Cureton, thanks for all the time. It was a pleasure having you in studio this week.
Vito, it was great coming here. Glad I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to you. I see you all the time. You come by, you give me a high five, and you keep rolling. So you invited me down, so it was a pleasure for me to be here working with you, John.
Thank you much for all the time. Thanks to you, John, to everybody else tuning in to this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. And with that, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.